Good morning, everyone. My name is Nigel Ricks. I'm Head of Enabling Technologies at the KTN, and I'm going to be chair for this session. We will share slides and the recording after the session, so you'll get details of that following it. So just a quick introduction to KTN. We're now about just over 200 experts, a not-for-profit organization who focus on research and development and helping organizations, both industry and academia, to innovate products and services within the UK. And our particular raison d'etre is to try and connect innovators with new partners. We assume companies will know people in their own sector, so what we're trying to do is look at cross-sector opportunities where we can connect you to not the usual suspects to create ambitious ideas to accelerate real-world solution. Surveys we've done in the past show that for companies, organizations that have worked with the KTN, they have managed to reduce their time to market by up to 12 months. So as well as helping people within the general industry, both the sectors and the technologies, where there's a particular opportunity, we create innovation networks. These are special projects within the KTN that bring together and focus very much on cross-community sharing. So trying to give those insights to developed into one area to as many other areas as we can. We have innovation networks running in a number of areas. And in particular today, we're going to be talking about the innovation network we're running to support the Made Smarter program. So Made Smarter. Back in 2016, 2017, Jürgen Meyer organized a team of UK experts in manufacturing to create a vision of where manufacturing could be in the UK. The UK is 9th in the world in terms of manufacturing. And that work resulted in a government report called the Made Smarter Review. Now, the Made Smarter Review highlighted 4 particular areas that activity would particularly help the industry. The first one was adoption, second was innovation, leadership, and skills. And those areas are now being addressed with different schemes funded by the UK government. The adoption section is was initially funded through the Northwest Pilot. This was funding given to that particular area that allowed companies to access expertise and also grant funding to allow them to take on new innovations. The leadership and skills agenda is being addressed by Equinity and is through their Engage scheme. And you can see details of that on their particular website. But the largest part of the UK funding is devoted to innovation. And that is particularly the area where the KTN is operating. So within innovation, there are in fact 6 particular areas of funding, government funding, that are taking part. The first one, the blue box, is collaborative R&D funding. These are schemes that allow companies to work with collaborators to generate new technologies, new products, or new processes. There have been 2 rounds of that, the Fast Start and the Digital Supply Chain. And we expect a further round to be announced this year for industry. And in the green section, we can see the research centres that were funded that were helping with the low TRL areas, the new innovation technologies developed by academia, and acting as a focus for that area. Coming down below the research centres, we have the digital accelerators. And that is a scheme run initially by the Digital Catapult, allowing early stage companies to accelerate their own business with support and funding. And on the left, the innovation hubs, a pilot has been run by the High Value Manufacturing Centre. These act as places that contain test beds that allow companies either to evaluate new technologies or to use them to test their own technologies. At the bottom, we have standards, and BSI are running a report on standards that are particularly relating to the manufacturing sector, and their report will come out later this year. And at the top, international. That will help companies not only access the Horizon Europe funding, but also look at taking experts from the UK to overseas countries for sharing internationally and being able to transmit some of the UK expertise overseas, as well as accessing expertise from overseas. Within the report, there were a number of key areas that were identified. And in the verticals, there are the main sectors, 6 main sectors: medicines, aero, nuclear, etc. And in support of those, there are a number of horizontal areas, which are technologies that go across all those sectors. And the larger boxes, AI, machine learning, data analytics, additive manufacturing, were seen as areas where developments were taking place that could assist manufacturing. Since the initial report, there are 2 new cross sectors, blockchain and sensors. And also we recognize a number of secondary areas in terms of net zero. So where are we now? We are now working actively within the innovation network on all these areas. But rather than creating new things, what we're trying to do is build on the expertise we already hold within the KTN. And so some of you may recognize some of these mugshots. These are people who exist within the KTN who are supporting the effort to do the Made Smarter Innovation Network. But in particular now, we're scouting for new technologies that can support the manufacturing sector. Within surveys, we've found people looking for insights from within their own sectors, but also from cross sectors, looking at stories that will help people understand opportunities for change. And so in particular, we've got 2 particular websites, and you'll see these links when you receive the slides. But we're looking to develop a Made Smarter Innovation showreel, which are videos of people who are doing things that are applicable, and also case studies, very powerful companies to listen to what other people have done to understand what is the art of the possible. And we encourage people to do these. And these will be put up on the Made Smarter website, which will become the central repository for information around the Made Smarter program. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to introduce our speakers. You have already got their bios. We want to keep this as the main presentations down to an hour. So I'm not going to repeat the particular bios. But what I want to do now is hand over to Dr. Lorenzo Conti of Crover for our first presentation. Lorenzo, would you like to share your screen?
Thank you for the introduction, Nigel. So as Nigel said, I am founder and managing director at Crover. We are a startup based in Edinburgh. And at the very core of what we do at Crover is effectively the world's first underground drone, in the sense of the first device able to propel itself below the surface of solid granular media like sand, grains, and powders. And more specifically, we're focused on using our Crover Robo, as we call it, as there is no dictionary word for that type of device, to help grain storage operators maintain the quality of their stock. So why focus on grain storage? Because it is still today the single phase post-harvest and pre-shells with the highest losses in the grain supply chain. And that is mainly due to the fact that a lot of things can go wrong when you're storing grains in units like silos and sheds. But primarily, if you don't maintain your temperature and moisture conditions appropriately, pests like insects and molds can develop, spoiling the grains, reducing their value, and also in some cases, making them not usable for human or animal consumption. And on top of that, the way grain stores are monitored at the moment is very labor intensive. Suffices to think that the most common method of monitoring grain bulks by a very large majority is having someone walking physically on top of grain bulks, which is also very dangerous, because if you sink in a grain bulk, there's nothing that can save you, but also is very time consuming and very, very hard to do. So not something that people really enjoy doing. And at the same time, there is a growing regulatory pressure to move away from the classical way of doing things, which is fumigating grain bulks regularly, and towards what we call integrated pest management practices, which is really the family of practices to maintain the quality of grain bulks without the use or with a light use of chemicals. And right now, there's really only two main types of solutions available to grain storage operators. The first one, which is the one that I mentioned, which is these heavy end spears that you have to physically insert manually on the surface of grain bulks, and also is unrepresentative conditions within the middle of the bulk, because they can only reach as far as that spear goes. And the more advanced methods are in the form of kind of static temperature sensors, usually in the form of cable probes with sensors at a few points down the length of the cable. These are very capital intensive. They still only provide a very limited picture, and hence only a small number of grain storage units have these in place. And the only innovation in the last years has been in making the traditional temperature probes wireless. So as I mentioned earlier, we have developed that Crover Robo, that underground drone, and we equipped it with temperature and moisture sensors so that it measures these two parameters as it moves autonomously through the bulk of the grains and basically builds a 3D map of conditions within the bulk. If temperature and moisture values go up beyond the threshold, then grain storage operators receive a notification, and they can log into our web-based app to basically try to determine what went wrong and to try to decide what action to take, whether it is cooling or aeration, or even just sending grains into production or selling them early. Why we've been able to do this and other people haven't been able to get literally anything to move below the surface of dense granular media before, because traditionally if you just try to drag something through this type of media, you have to overcome very large drag forces and create basically almost global displacement both upstream and downstream of the moving object. So we kind of discovered a little bit of a novel physical effect, let's say, what we're starting to call the Crover method now, which effectively represents the first feasible method for locomotion through bulk solids. So like I mentioned earlier, not just grains, but also sand, powders, or any other assembly of solid granular particles. We have been granted already a UK patent on the Crover method with really broad scope of protection, and we have patent filings in kind of the other top 7 markets across the world on that technology. So we came across the Measurement for Recovery project program from the National Physical Laboratory in collaboration with some other organizations, which offered some free advice and also kind of testing facilities that we couldn't afford ourselves for carrying out some tests on our materials and device. And in particular, in this case, we worked with team and his very capable team, NPL, to try to measure the tribology properties of different materials that we were thinking of using in the production of our device against different types of grains, primarily measuring the friction coefficient at the contact between those materials and the grains, and also looking at the abrasion that was being exerted on that contact, because obviously we had to make sure that both the material wasn't wearing out and also that we don't manage the grains as it's moving through. So that proved to be a very successful project. Also, we were able through that to use kind of some of the very expensive machines that Tim and his team have that have been bespokely built by the NPL team, and hence are kind of not available anywhere else, and we wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. So kind of more generally, why should people care about a robot that monitors grains if you're not storing grains yourself? Well, as I mentioned, there's very significant losses currently in the grain supply chain, which has a lot of consequences both from a social and environmental point of view. Obviously, where we're trying to increase production instead of, most of the times instead of increasing efficiency. But if you can cut down those 20% losses to as close as possible to zero, that will also help kind of feeding the growing population, and also make sure that dangerous chemicals like mycotoxins, they don't end up in food as we do today. Also, the kind of our system and more widely integrated pest management is in line with the EU farm to fork practice, which also the kind of UK government has been trying to follow, and which was recently celebrating its first year anniversary, which is also promoting a move towards IPM. So I'd like to invite you to imagine a future where every grain that enters a grain store is, sees its way out with the same quality. And that's a future where we will keep on #saving grains. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. That was very interesting. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Timothy Camps from NPL, who worked on the project, to talk about their activities generally on this one and other areas. Timothy.
Thanks very much, Nigel. So yes, my name is Timothy Camps, and I'm a tribologist at the National Physical Laboratory, and that means that I look after measurements of friction and wear. I've decided this morning it would be quite good to split the talk in half, so I'll start off talking a little bit about how tribological measurements fit into digital quality management systems, and then look at a couple of case studies. Of course, the first one will be the one that Lorenzo mentioned with his company, and then we'll look at two measurement techniques, one that's been developed as part of a European project for high-speed on-the-machine measurement to support autonomous decision-making in manufacturing processes, and then the last one, which is aimed at R&D processes, looking at understanding wear mechanisms in situ. So online in situ measurements enable real-time automated decisions to optimize manufacturing processes. And the advantages that this provides are tighter tolerances on manufactured parts, increased plant uptime, and decreasing waste. But of course, in order to make informed decisions using autonomous algorithms and AI, we need to make sure that the physical measurements we're making are traceable to national standards and are provided with known uncertainties so that we can have confidence in the data and know that it's reliable. And these measurements are available through the Government National Measurement Service Programme, and this is supplied by various national labs across the country. The area that I focus on is friction and wear measurements, and these can be critical for evaluating the functional performance of materials after manufacture for materials quality assurance, but they can also be used for monitoring the health of plant for predictive maintenance and to ensure reliability and quality. So who are tribologists? Well, they're not just me and NPL fellow Mark G, who look after this area in the materials department, NPL, but they're specialist systems engineers, bringing together scientists and engineers from different disciplines to bring measurement science into highly specific applications in order to provide solutions that are substantiated by these interdisciplinary science areas. And the problems cover measurement of friction, wear of various mechanisms, and lubrication in various regimes. When it comes to tribological testing, the real nuance of the work is to analyze a complex assembly, identify the rate limiting interface and interaction, and then design a repeatable laboratory experiment that reproduces the same wear mechanism and failure modes that are seen in service. And often what's asked is, how can I have any confidence that the laboratory tests will correlate with real-world service performance? And as you move away from the end application and towards an idealized benchtop test, you get some advantages and some disadvantages. Of course, as you move away, you get increasing levels of abstraction and the opportunity to miss crucial parts of the interaction that actually dominate the mechanism that's going to be studied. But you benefit from increasing control, increase of ease of instrumentation, and usually a decrease in cost and time to perform the measurements. The work that I look at tends to use actual parts and geometries along with bespoke test methods, quite often based on test standards that are configured for a specific application. And the reason for this is it provides results that correlate with the real-world service performance, which is not often the case for standard tests. So that was a bit of the background. And now I move on to a case study with Crover and then the two measurement techniques. So as Lorenzo showed in his animation, the motion of the granular drone moving through the bulk medias, you can see that that's quite a complex interaction. And we were tasked with quantifying the friction on the control surfaces of this device. Now, this is quite a difficult problem because the length scale of the features on the surface compared to the contact area are actually quite similar. And this provides quite a big problem when you come to measuring friction, because when you try and measure the plane in which the friction force is acting, it moves depending on the local surface form. And so with standard measurement apparatus, quite often you end up with a large error between the friction force at the interface and the one being measured. And for a problem like this, where considering a serial grain and a 3D printed material, which has directional surface textures on it, this length scale is quite awkward because it fits in between macro scale testing and then smaller testing at the nanomechanics length scale. But at MPL, we have an in-house developed device that's designed specifically for measuring real engineering surfaces with significant form error. And this allows us to measure textiles and also materials with directionality, such as some 3D printed materials. And the advantage of this piece of equipment is that we can readily modify the end effector to accommodate various different geometries, including, in this case, serial grains. Now, this graph on the right-hand side really shows the advantage of using a technique like this, because it gives significant sensitivity to differentiate between material types, plotted there on the horizontal axis, but also the directionality of the material. And you can see, looking at material 4, the significant difference in the friction performance depending on the orientation of the material surface to the direction of motion. So now I come on to a MPL project that MPL are involved in. This is a European metrology program for innovation and research. And this project looks at using high-speed piezo-resistive contact probes for quantitative measurement of surface finish and mechanical properties. You can think of this as a small tactile stylus profilometer that's capable of operating at very high traversing speeds. You can see an image of the equipment setup in the top right, and then some profiles that are typical of the device at the bottom. And our role is to introduce these probes into tribological testing. So for reciprocating geometries and unidirectional apparatus, as well as our tribometers that work in situ inside scanning electron microscopes. This project's quite exciting because of the opportunity it offers for in situ surface texture measurements during manufacturing processes. And there's a stakeholder workshop on the 23rd of June. And should this be of any interest, please discuss this with me in the Q&A or my contact details at the end. So a bit more detail on this, we can see a piece of alumina at the bottom left, and this has been repeatedly scratched by a diamond stylus. And after each scratch, we've measured a 2D profile across the surface using one of these microprobes. And you can see the trace from that on the right-hand side. This gives us quite a lot of information, not only about the shape of the wear scar itself, but also about the performance of the indented tip, whether the indented tip's wearing, and also the rate of material removal, as you can see in the bottom right graph. One of the applications, or one of the case studies that were presented in the stakeholder meeting is looking at applying this to an industrial process involving rolling machinery. And then the last measurement I wanted to show is a in-situ measurement technique that can be used for understanding wear mechanisms. So this is oriented at the R&D side of tribology. And what we've got here is a pin on disc configuration. So the pink disc rotates under the brass holder. And as it goes round, we can measure the wear that's occurring on the surface using a non-contact optical probe that you can see labeled on the drawing there. So here's a quick schematic. So we've got a diamond indenter on a disc, and as we rotate the disc, we're measuring the friction and also the wear that's occurring. And you can see that quite clearly in this video. At the top, you've got the 3D information. At the bottom, you've got the optical image. And you can also see the information regarding the friction and load. So as this test starts, the load is so low that the contact actually is vibrating on the surface, giving this disorder on the friction coefficient. As we increase the load, you can see the wear depth increasing. And as the disc continues to rotate, you can see a decrease in friction coefficient, which reaches a quasi-steady state at the same time that the width of the wear scar stops increasing. Information like this is really useful because what we can do is perform tests that we call high value, so we can understand where transitions from a single test rather than having to run multiple tests or use relocation testing, which can often introduce additional uncertainties. So just to summarize that quick run through, the confidence in automated decisions made by digital quality management systems really depends on the quality of the physical measurements in the first place. Frictional wear measurements can provide insights into functional performance of parts, as well as monitoring health for predictive maintenance to ensure reliability and quality. And these measurements are available from the National Measurement Service, as well as in situ measurements offering high value empirical understanding of tribological contacts. It's worth pointing out that for informing models and machine learning algorithms, laboratory tests offer increased repeatability, sensitivity, and precision, enabling these systems to be properly characterized. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'd now like to ask Glenys Tellett to talk about how the industry can access the capabilities of the National Measurement Service. Glenys.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully I'm now sharing with you. Yes, I'd just like to talk to you about the Measurement for Recovery program. It didn't start out as a program. Early on in the pandemic, we had companies reaching out to us with new COVID technologies saying, can you help us prove that these work so they can be adopted by the NHS and other people? So at that time, as a national laboratory, just helped. But things started to snowball, and we realized that we needed to formalize what we were doing. And also we had sister laboratories in terms of TUVNEL, NML at LGC, and NIBS and the design unit that joined us. So we had a wider program. So What's Measurement for Recovery about? Well, in short, it's an opportunity for UK companies to get access to our expertise for free of charge. So it's not a competition. You just apply with what you'd like help with, and if we can help you, we do. So the support is up to 20 days, help from one of the laboratories, or sometimes several of the laboratories if it's interdisciplinary. And typically that's delivered over a 3-month period. And sometimes it's advice, sometimes it's experimental work. And there's only 2 real criteria for getting the support. One is that it's not something that you could easily buy in the marketplace. So if you came to us and said, could you do our tensile testing for free? We're going to say no, because you could buy that somewhere else, and we don't want to undercut our other businesses. And that you have some de minimis allowance left. It's probably not called de minimis since Brexit, but if you're in Northern Ireland, you're still covered by de minimis anyway. But there is information on BEIS's website about the new state aid rules. So it used to be that if you'd had less than 200,000 euros of de minimis support in 3 years, that you were eligible. I think the number has gone up slightly in terms of being slightly more generous for the new rules, but they are on the BEIS's website, and there is a link to that from our website. And we've had applications from nearly 600 companies to date. They've been spread across the UK, and interestingly, by the far biggest applicant group is micro businesses. So these are often companies that are pre-revenue and are trying to bring a new idea to the market. And I guess that this free access has allowed companies to work with us that wouldn't work with us in the past. And many of these companies, like Crover, we wouldn't have known before M4R. So we are really pleased to be helping businesses through what's been quite a difficult period, if I'm honest with you. So it's not been easy for companies, to collaborate with other organisations, because they were often shut down and had their own staff out of the office. And economically, it's been a difficult time. So just some examples of the types of projects that we've been undertaking. So there are quite a few cluster of projects where people are developing products or processes, and we're helping them with some measurement before a change, and then they improve their product or process, and we make some more measurements and help them analyze what the changes are and what further improvements could be made. There are also quite a few projects where perhaps a company's come forward with a new technology and they need help to look at the performance of that product. And the data they get back helps with the confidence of investors. So investors know that the product does what it says on the can. And also buyers are assured that the new technology is an improvement on what they've already been using to date. So it helps with all that trust. So the partners that are involved, National Physical Laboratory, and we cover all kinds of physical measurement. You've heard from Tim about wear and materials, but it covers a full range to dimensional, to some biological measurements. So a whole range of measurement expertise. Design unit at Newcastle is very specific. They're about gears. TÜV are all about flow measurement, largely in oil and gas. NIBS are about biological medicines. So they have been very busy during COVID, looking into vaccines and their efficacy. And then there's the National Measurement Laboratory, LGC, who are largely about chemical measurements and some biological measurements. So you can have support from all of these. And in fact, you don't need to choose who. If you submit a problem, we will find the most appropriate person for you. So just to talk through a couple of case studies, in addition to Lorenzo's example of his robot that looks at grains. What a fantastic idea that is, Lorenzo. I love that product. So one of the early case studies, companies that came to us was Taylor Garfit, and they were looking at all the plastic waste that has been created by COVID, and they have a completely biodegradable face mask here. So we helped them CAD model that and look at the data. We looked at reviewing the visor against relevant standards. We loaned them a test head that they would be able to do some simple testing on their design. And they're now really close to market, and it's a much more environmentally friendly product than some of the products that are currently out there. Another example in life sciences, Oxonics produce an ultrasound treatment system to help with the treatment of high density tumors. So in effect, what's happening is these particles are put into the tumor, and when they're stimulated, it means that the chemical treatment is much more effective. So they are very close now to having a product to market. So the thing that they really wanted to do was have some quality control on that particle sizing of those particles, so they reliably had the particles under control that they were delivering to patients. So particle size measurement is something that NPL knows a lot about, and they now have a quality control method to control that particle size, and it's also informing their development of new particles now that they can more effectively measure them. It's not all life sciences though. So we've worked on computer vision systems for dimensional measurement. In particular, a farmer in East Anglia is looking at the harvesting of their leeks, and they want to track crop progress towards harvest. So they're harvesting at just the right time, the optimum time for their leeks. We've worked on sensors for roadside emissions, optimization of carbon capture and storage processes, battery life predictions. There's a whole range of topics that we have been able to help people with. And what have people, we've put in a process whereby all of the applicants are contacted afterwards, just to, in the early days, see what they made of the support they were given. So 76 companies said their commercial opportunity had increased. 68% had increased their sales in new and existing markets. 60% we'd help them secure more investment from external sources and internal sources. And 37% of applicants had reduced their costs through decreased production costs or material costs or inward component costs as a result. So if you would like to put in an M4R application, we would say it's very fast and simple. We have one web page form where you just have to say what your problem that you'd like help with and what difference it would make to you in words. Very easy. And it's not a competition like an Innovate competition. So everybody that we can help, we do help, subject to the proviso clearly that you're a UK company and it's not something standard that a test house would supply to you, for example. There is no grant to the company. That's why we can run it so quickly and so easily, because there's no due diligence from Treasury about who we fund and who we don't fund, because we're not giving anybody any money. So it makes life very easy. We've done a lot of interventions to date. So the next batch of projects that we're likely to be delivered from will be from July onwards. But we're keeping our website open so people can still apply, but just managing your expectation is we have a lot of work going through currently, so we won't be delivering our next batch of projects towards July. But if you think it might be for you, then please do apply.
Thank you very much, Glenys. That's very interesting, and it's an excellent programme. I'd like to remind those people who joined slightly later, after the next presentation by Liz, we'll be having a panel Q&A session. To pose a question, you can either type it into the chat box, and we'd ask you to put a Q or question in the start of your chat. That allows us to spot it. Alternatively, if you go to the bottom of your screen under the Reactions tab, you can raise a hand and that will spot you, and you can raise your question personally. So I'd like to now introduce Liz Salter, who will talk about one of the programs that the Institute for Manufacturing has been doing on digital manufacturing on a shoestring. Fascinating title and a great project, Liz. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Nigel. Thanks, everyone. I'm very impressed. The NPL team have all stuck to time, so let's see if I can manage to do the same. Yeah, so I've got a couple of examples of low-cost quality management solutions, low cost and simple. And they've spun out of, or they're our first industrial pilots in our digital manufacturing on a shoestring project, which is a big research project we're running at EPSRC funded project we're running at IFM together with our friends at University of Nottingham. I've also got my colleagues Gotchen Yilmaz and Zhen Yangling on the call, so that they'll be better placed to answer any sort of more technical questions that come up in the Q&A at the end. So gone 2 slides ahead. I'm going to just set the scene a little bit and give a hopefully brief overview of the shoestring project. Hopefully people will find that quite interesting. And as I say, we've got 2 contrasting case studies. One's a kind of automated in-process inspection, and the other one is more around the sort of information management side of quality management. As I say, we've got a well-supported Q&A session at the end. So to talk you into the idea of digital manufacturing on a shoestring, which is, you know, cheap and cheerful and quick to do, the head of our main research centre at IFM, Duncan McFarlane, noticed several years ago that you know everyone's talking about Industry 4.0 and digital manufacturing and the next great thing. But there seemed to be very much a feeling out there that this wasn't something for the small and medium-sized manufacturers. It was perceived as expensive, they didn't have the right skills, things are complex, and it was also kind of seen as not for us. Solutions were kind of big and cumbersome and very much aimed at the big manufacturers. And the sort of weird thing alongside that is SMEs not seeing it as for them, but in everyday life things becoming more and more digital. You know, we've all got smart everythings, and you know the digital capability that exists around us is very accessible, so there's a kind of things didn't quite line up there. So the vision of the shoestring project is to be a bit more low cost and tactical about it, and try and get manufacturers to approach digital in the way that we do it at home, or you know in our personal lives. So looking at small scale tactical digital manufacturing solutions, sort of little things that can be made better through digital technologies. So not talking about digital transformation, not talking about digital journeys, just finding problems in a factory that these low cost kind of off the shelf digital devices, open source softwares could help fix. So the first part of that as a research project was obviously to get a better feel for what kind of problems we might be looking at, what kind of things SMEs might be looking for help with. And we did back then, I say this is now kind of 2 or 3 years ago, look at the multiple digital maturity assessments and digital diagnostic type approaches that exist, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and we didn't find that they were hitting this particular area. They were interesting and they gave insight into the capabilities of a company, but you know, if you were just trying to do something and get on with something, they weren't necessarily signposting or helping you identify what a helpful digital solution might look like. So we've kind of swiveled that approach a little bit, and we've obviously got extensive experience of working with manufacturing SMEs and quite good data sets on the kind of things we had helped companies with. So we built up almost a kind of, we call it a solutions catalogue, but it's just a list in Excel, a kind of shopping list of things that we know SMEs find helpful and that can be done through low-cost digital technologies. And we've run tens of workshops with hundreds of SMEs to kind of get them to pick the things off this list that they would find most helpful. And we've worked through that and pulled out. We've actually, I'm going to show you 2 top 10s. We've got the top 10 from the digital manufacturing on a Shoestring project, and we're also running digital construction on a Shoestring project. And we've been going through a very similar process of, here's a shopping list of nice things that you might be able to do. Which one would you most like to do? And then let's crack on and do it. And we've taken good input from the companies at the workshops. And I say it's been really interesting the way it's panned out, because even within the first few workshops, we had a clear top 10 emerging. So this list here is the top 10 manufacturing on a Shoestring digital solutions. The ones highlighted in green are, shall we put both lists up? That's the construction one. So the green ones are the things that appear on both lists. And you'll see, quality, not surprisingly, comes out in different ways on that list. You can see there's unified change management and issue reporting, and this kind of connection between design and operations. It's the number 1 on the construction one and number 2 on manufacturing. And then we've also got the other one I'm going to talk about today, process monitoring and automated quality inspection appear. And there's other stuff in there that is very much quality related. There's some nice things on the construction list around kind of work instructions, assembly instructions, automated completeness checking, and just, automating some simple stuff or getting information to people clearly, doing straightforward things with data. I'm sure you're all kind of starting to think now of sort of simple things that you could be doing, which can genuinely make a big difference in quality. And the other way I sometimes talk into the digital manufacturing on a Shoestring project is, the kind of the continuous improvement type approach, the idea of, what are the little things you can do on a shop floor just to, operator-led often to make day-to-day tasks better. This is almost the kind of 21st century equivalent. So just bringing a little bit of low-cost digital to those little incremental improvements. If you add them all up, they can make some quite big differences. So just one more slide to give a picture of what we mean by this digital manufacturing on a Shoestring. And actually, it's almost worth starting on the right-hand side of the slide. So you can see there we talk, I'm saying part tracking, digital job cards, monitoring systems. Those are the types of solutions that people want help with. And what we've been trying to do is link the low cost off the shelf technologies that you see on the left, whether it's your Raspberry Pi or your GoPro camera, whether it's sort of straightforward user interfaces from low cost tablets or smartphones, off the shelf open source software. So it's linking those technologies into a set of kind of recognizable, we call them services. It's kind of collecting those technologies together into these useful building blocks that can then be stuck together to form a solution, so that these things aren't just accessible to people who've got a high level of digital integration or software programming type skills, where the research challenge is showing how we can make it really, really easy to use those devices to address the operational challenges or engineering challenges that exist on people's shop floors. So the first case study, just to go, and I'll go through these quickly just to give you an idea of the kind of thing we're doing. First one is an automated quality inspection. It's a company that's got an automated braiding process. So they're braiding fibers high speed at kind of quite precise angles, because the braid has to have certain physical properties. And the way to see whether the braid is going to function correctly or not is the angle at which the braids are relative to each other. And it's not, I'd hesitate to say this when the NPL people are on the phone, on the call, but we're not talking high precision, high tolerance. Broadly if it's right or not, and to be able to do it in line as the process is running. You can do some more detailed stuff later on to check you're in the right kind of parameters, but it's a great use case for a low cost camera to measure a braid angle, to have it straight off at the end of the machine, and just like, old fashioned SPC type stuff, flag straight away if things are starting to move in the wrong direction. And there's a sort of indicator of what we're looking at. And I think, you can get your head around that quite quickly, that there's some straightforward basic services in there in terms of there's a data collection piece, which is obviously the camera. There's some data storage requirements and then some analysis of that data to process the measurements and check whether your braid angle is in the right zone. And then clearly a user interface to have some kind of interaction to set it up and also to flag when you are or aren't in the right zone. And then those little jigsaw pieces show the low-cost technologies that we're using to build up that solution. And you can see there's a fairly ubiquitous Raspberry Pi, and it's actually the same, it's one Raspberry Pi being used for all of those activities. You can see we're using SQL. You can see we've got it's actually the camera version of the Raspberry Pi, so it's all very straightforward. And you know, I won't pretend to be familiar with the software, but we've developed some very straightforward software building blocks that manage and do the analysis piece around it. And Zhen Yang, who's on the call, started off by knocking this up in his room. And you can see the cost of the hardware. You know, it really is low cost. We had some sample images from the company that we checked and kind of proved the thinking on. And then we're now at the point where actually we're doing a solution implementation in the factory. And it's pretty much, I think some bits of cardboard have now been added to the solution to shield a bit of light out of it, which those of you who've done things with cameras will be familiar with. But it really is the camera, the Raspberry Pi, and a bit of straightforward analysis. And I'll just flash this slide up, not really to talk through, but just to give an idea of the work we're doing in the research team around this kind of building block and the automation of the software that joins the building blocks together to really make this into a straightforward thing for people to do for themselves. And then the other case study, slightly different. This is from the digital construction on a shoestring project. We've been doing a nice piece of work with a small low energy modular house builder, so, you know, where the kind of the bits of the house are made off site and then it comes on site and hopefully all fits together beautifully. I'm sure you can all imagine that actually when you get your bits out of your factory and onto your building site, sometimes things don't quite go to plan or don't quite look like what they were meant to look like. So a real simple, low cost way of reporting that back into the design team as a kind of learning point for the future, and also as a what do I do now because I need to make this work, was something that this company really wanted. And I thought it'd be quite nice to flash this up because it shows the process we go through with a company to specify their digital manufacturing or their shoestring solution. And we take this user story perspective. So to keep things cheap and simple, you have to really avoid spec creep. So you have to be really, really focused on who wants this and what do they want it for. So we tease out a really simple set of user stories about what does this solution really need to be able to do, and then we limit the initial development of the solution to the first usually 3 or 4 user stories. We can keep the other ones to develop the solution to the next stage, but just having that subset to focus the initial solution on helps us keep it cheap and simple and get something out there quickly, which is a really good learning experience for everybody as well. So you can see the kind of, it's a communication tool. It's logging the problems, it's sharing the problems, and perhaps the next phase will be to kind of count the problems and start to look at root causes. But it's let's not run before we can walk. Let's just start sharing the data piece. And again, it's been, we can see the difference it's going to make in this particular company. So we've gone from the user stories, we've pulled out a nice little list of key functions. Hopefully you can see how that's using the same kind of building blocks and services that we're using in the very different example of the measuring the braid angle. Again, we need a data collection, we need some storage, some analysis, and an user interface. The questions around the type of data and where it is and how accurate it needs to be are all quite interesting as well. Everybody always starts off thinking they need a kind of real-time view of what's going on, and we're saying, well, actually you don't, because you haven't got anything at the moment. So a snapshot a couple of times a day would be a huge step change from where you are now. So let's start with that. So we're at the point now of developing the shoestring service modules, and working through the solution with them. I do have a short video.
I'm afraid, Liz,
I was going to stop.
Over.
Yeah, sorry, carried away with my enthusiasm. I will stop right there. That's a good point to stop, actually. Thanks, Nigel.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, and I love your cat alarm clock, which I think was also
I know, I can,
warning
sorry.
you about.
I was
10
hoping
minutes
you
is up.
couldn't hear her. Yeah.
Oh, no. No, and I'm sorry to cut you short because it is a fantastic program and very interesting, and it's particularly doing something that we're keen on, which is addressing the needs of SMEs, particularly trying to prove the point that installing Industry 4 and quality systems doesn't have to be a really big expensive, but companies are making practical benefits with very little cost. So no, it's a great project, and sorry to have to cut you short. Okay, what I want to do now is hopefully, yes, find the right slide, and we'll move to the Q&A session. So I'm going to stop my slide sharing. Hopefully the speakers will be there, and then we'll pick up Q&A. If you could type questions into the chat box or raise your hand at the bottom of the screen, then we will take those questions as they come forward. I've got two of my colleagues, Nicole and Hannah, who've been helping me, hopefully, on this, keeping an eye on the chat window. And neither of them have come off mute. Ah, thank you, Hannah. You are my hero. So Hannah, did I spot a question for Glenys about the battery life and what techniques they'd used on that one?
Yeah, there was a question for Glenys. I don't know whether Tim will be able to answer the question as Glenys, she left.
Oh, Glenys had a clash with another meeting, so I'm afraid we may have lost Glenys.
Yeah, there was a question about the battery life prediction. Tim.
No.
No.
Tim is resisting the opportunity to come off.
Thanks for that.
So
What I'm going to do is I'm going to, so I don't actually know the specifics of that project, but many of these have been written into case studies, and I've just, let's see if I can just send this to the right person in the chat. So there's a list of case studies at this web address I've just put in the chat. I think there's at least 9 there, and it may well be there. If it's not, I can we can talk to Glenys about that. Yeah.
What we'll do is we'll monitor the chat. If there aren't any questions that haven't been answered, we will actually send them to the appropriate speaker and connect you to them. Now, fortunately, Tim, there is a question for you. Can you say a little bit more about the NPL tribology capability around textile testing?
Yeah, I can try. So the tribology testing at NPL sits inside the materials group, and we have access to a wide variety of materials characterization techniques, as well as using the expertise, or utilizing the expertise of scientists in our surface technology group. So when it comes to doing evaluating slightly unusual materials, such as the textiles, we tend to work collaboratively with them to analyze the material properties and then to test. We've got a couple of different bits of test apparatus, though, when it comes to friction and wear at several different length scales. So it really depends if it's sort of the overall performance of a product that's of interest, or whether it's looking at the response of a weave at a fibre level. And we've got several different bits of kit that can look at those length scales.
Thank you very much. Hannah, do we have any other questions at the moment in the chat window?
Yes, there was a question from Sam to Glenys regarding the specific challenges in biodegradable plastics. Is that something you, Tim, could answer?
No, I'm sorry.
It might be better if we'll get Glenys to do that one. Well, look, it's excellent that we have ended with, in fact, very few questions, which is a great sign for the speakers. I'd just like to thank all our speakers today for the different views on the issues about quality management within manufacturing. I hope you've all enjoyed the session. So what I'm going to do now is ask Anita to stop the recording, and we'll move on to the informal networking.